Negotiation on the AUMF. Negotiations to reach a deal on AUMF passage continue here in the Senate. We had a number of votes yesterday evening on Republican amendments, and I expect we're going to see a few more later today. Senate passage of AUMF is now a matter of when, not if. And today we're going to continue working to make sure it happens as soon as we can. Americans want to see an end to endless Middle East wars. Passing this AUMF is a necessary step of putting these bitter conflicts squarely behind us. I thank my colleagues for their work. I look forward to this bill's passage very soon. We are allowing amendments, but we shouldn't just be dilatory. We should move forward. MAGA extremism. At the start of this Congress, I urge Republicans in both the Senate and the House to rid themselves of MAGA extremism and work with Democrats for the good of the country, and even for the good of their own party. We believe MAGA republicanism hurts their party because so many Americans on both sides of the aisle reject it. Well, over 3 months later, Republicans have failed in so many ways to abandon MAGA extremism. If anything, they have doubled down and embraced it even more tightly, again, to the detriment of the country and the detriment to their party. If you just want to know how extreme the GOP has become in the majority, look no further than what's happening on the House floor today and tomorrow. As early as this afternoon, House Republicans will try resurrecting their doomed attempt to prevent retirement investors from considering governance ESG factors when making investment decisions. Republicans talk a lot about their love of free markets and letting the private sector do its work. But their obsession with eliminating ESG would do the opposite. By turning ESG into a dirty new little acronym, Republicans are trying to force their own views down the throats of every company and every investor. President Biden has already vetoed this nakedly partisan measure, and it's clear the votes do not exist to override this veto in the House. It won't even come close. So it's bad enough that House Republicans are wasting time on show votes. But it's even more astonishing that this show vote, of all things, is designed to restrict the private sector on purely ideological grounds. It's a sad sign of how radicalized and divisive the GOP has become over the past few years. But, Mr. President, that's not all. Today's potential vote on the ESG override is the appetizer. Tomorrow's main course is even more horrifying. As we speak, House Republicans are considering a sweeping piece of legislation that would nationalize school policy, endanger billions in nutrition funding, and accelerate the trend of book bans across the nation. The House Republican school control bill is Orwellian to the core, and it will not see the light of day here in the Senate. If passed, schools across the nation would be forced to adhere to a panoply of federal regulations that take power away from parents and school districts. Again, let me repeat that. It would take power away from parents and school districts, away from educators, and put it in the hand of elected politicians. Again, the GOP that treasured small government, local control, is long since gone, replaced once again by hard-right MAGA ideologues. The bill could be devastating to our communities. According to one report from CBO, schools that fail to comply with these MAGA mandates would be excluded from child nutrition programs, impacting over 9 million kids who rely on schools for their meals. That's it. Punish the poor kids. Make sure they don't have a meal if the school board doesn't comply with these extreme provisions. The GOP would also expose school districts to even greater risks of book bannings, censorship, and intimidation. Last year alone, there were over 2,500 book bans across the country on titles that oftentimes aren't remotely offensive, but which still draw the ire of the hard right. One school librarian in Pennsylvania, listen to this, it's crushing, was reportedly forced to remove a poster quoting Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel for violating district policy. Elie Wiesel violating district policy. What was the quote in question? Quote, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation." We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. That was removed. What is going on here with the extreme right? They're just losing it. There's something deeply malicious going on when the hard right, within the hard right. There's something deeply malicious going on within the hard right when even the quotes of Holocaust survivors are seen as too woke or offensive. Again, rather than abandon the MAGA hard right, the Republican Party as a whole seems to be doubling down. Legislation like the GOP's radical school control bill would only make matters worse. And I will assure people, the American people, the school children, that if this bill, if passed, will meet a dead end when it comes to the Senate. And finally, on the budget. In the aftermath of major bank collapses, House Republicans have spent this week not calling for calm, but sowing chaos. Chaos seems to be their calling card. Earlier this week, House GOP members, including the chairman of the House Budget Committee, said now is, quote, the best time to double down on debt ceiling, brinksmanship, and hostage-taking. They suggest absurdly that Democrats and Democratic policies are somehow to blame for what went wrong with Silicon Valley Bank. And they're trying to arbitrarily link the bank's collapse with the debt ceiling debate. This is a stupendously bad idea. This is an idea that has no logic, has no linear thinking in it at all. It's just throwing things together, throwing spaghetti on the wall. Threatening the full faith and credit of the United States is never appropriate. But at a time when markets require stability, it's supremely reckless. Republicans should remember that poor management and deregulation under President Trump made these bank collapses possible. It wasn't Democratic policies. And I would remind my Republican colleagues of this very important and telling fact. Inflation and interest rates are impacting institutions everywhere. But the vast majority of banks that have been properly managed are not in crisis. So the Republican convoluted argument falls very, very flat. If this environment is so bad for banks, why aren't all the banks affected? No, it's the few who are mismanaged. It's the few who were not regulated properly by the regulators. So to link the collapses with the debt ceiling, to suggest that these incidents should justify even more brinksmanship and hostage-taking is stunningly reckless. Instead of trying to provoke financial catastrophe, Republican leaders should stop hiding from the American people, stop coming up with diversions and subterfuges, and finally show us your plan. Today is March 23rd. It's been long enough. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.